Hi, I'm Carla with Country Girl Creations, and today we are going to be making the Darling Doll by Planet Applique. The Darling Doll by Planet Applique is a very versatile doll with a lot of different options. You can choose different hairstyles, dress styles, shoe styles, and even arm styles. This one was made in the 5x7 hoop and is about 14 inches tall and 5.5 inches wide. I chose to make the skirt partially in the embroidery machine and partially on the sewing machine. Let's go see how it's made. Now that we have our design loaded into our machine, we can continue with step 1. Now we will stitch down the felt for the doll joint reinforcements. The next thing we have to do is trim the felt. You want to trim your felt close to, but make sure you don't trim those stitches. Since I am making the long sleeve version, the sleeve fabric is going to be my larger piece of fabric. I have now placed my fabric, extending at least 1/2 inch on either side of all of the placement stitches. I put the sleeve fabric facing up and the skin tone fabric facing down. Now you will remove this fabric from the hoop. If your stabilizer is like mine and it has tore just a little bit right here, go ahead and get you a scrap piece of stabilizer and place it on the back side. I put the sleeve fabric facing up and the skin tone fabric facing down. Instead of removing this fabric now, we are going to fold this skin tone fabric back and smooth it out. Now we will begin with step 5. If you notice, I switched my thread color to match the fabric, and I'm going to continue with number 6, which is the doll joint reinforcement stitch. If you notice, I have pressed the seam allowance towards the skin tone fabric to align with the other side. Now I'm going to do this a little bit different than what the pattern says. I'm going to continue with my blue thread, which matches my sleeve fabric, and then switch to a skin tone fabric when it does the hands. And now the arms are complete. Now that we have the right leg design loaded into our machine, we can begin with step 1. I have laid all my fabric pieces down. The bottom one is the skin tone fabric. Then I've got a layer of felt, which will be the shoes. And I've actually laid a piece of cotton that's white on top of it because my felt is pretty thin. Now we will remove this fabric from the hoop. Now we can place the flesh tone fabric right sides up and continue with step 3. Make sure that you extend the fabric 3/4 of the way down this bottom rectangle. Now we will stitch the placement stitch for the shoe. And then we will lay our shoe fabric down over the top of that placement stitch. I'm using a piece of felt, and on the back I have just some quilter's cotton that's white because my felt is really thin. Now we are going to trim our shoe. When you trim your shoe fabric, you only have to trim along the top edge of the shoe. As you can tell, I have pressed the other piece with the seam allowance going towards the skin because you don't have to match the seam allowance with this one. Now I'm going to line up the seam of this fabric with the top portion of the shoe. And I'm going to continue with step 6. Now we are finished with the right leg. We will repeat the same steps for the left leg. And we are done with the left leg. Now that we have the design for the hair loaded into our embroidery machine, we can begin stitching step 1. Now we are going to place our felt right sides together on top of the placement stitch, making sure we cover it all the way around with excess fabric. Now we're going to stitch out step number 2. And we are all done with the hair. Now that we have the body design uploaded into our embroidery machine, we can begin the placement stitch. Now that we have completed our placement stitch for the body, we need to cut our dress fabric that is at least a 1/2 inch larger all the way around as this box right here. And now we will stitch down the center back. Now we will open up our fabric, smoothing it out, making sure it's wrinkle free. Then we will get our felt for the hair and we will put it down, making sure that it's big enough to cover all of the dress fabric. Now we will remove this fabric from our hoop. This is the piece that we just stitched down. You want to trim this seam allowance down to 1/2 inch. Now that we have used scrap stabilizer to repair the stabilizer that's in the hoop, we will continue with step 4. Now that we have completed step 4, we are going to cut our fabric. We need the skin tone fabric and the dress fabric to be big enough to cover this entire placement stitch in this top square. If your dress fabric is directional, you want to put it face down and you want the bottom of the fabric to go towards the top of your hoop. We're going to put them right sides together and we're going to proceed with step 5. Now that we have finished with step 5, we will take just the dress fabric and we're going to pull it all the way down and smooth out that seam, smoothing out the fabric in the hoop as well. Now we can proceed with step 6. We are now finished with the first part of the design. Now we're going to install the second part of the body, which is the face, including the eyes, nose, and mouth. Now that we have finished our face, we will move on to part 3 of the body, which is the hair. We will now stitch the placement stitches for part 3 of the body. Now we're going to stitch out the placement stitches for the hair. Now that we've laid the hair fabric down right sides up, which I'm using felt for, we're going to stitch it down. Now I'm going to trim the hair from around the face. When you get the hair trimmed away from the face, you can proceed with step 4. Now that we have the hair all stitched out, we're going to remove it from the stabilizer. Our next step is going to be cutting the hair out. Right here and here are little tabs where the machine did not stitch. We're going to cut and leave a good size amount of fabric there. Leaving a good size amount right here where you're going to stuff the hair is going to help you when you go to stitch it up. We're going to trim around the outside at 1/4 inch. Let's open the hair up. Put your finger as far in as you can get it and turn it right side out. And take your stick And that's how you turn it right side out. Do the same thing with the other one. Now we are ready to stitch them onto the head of the doll. I find it easier to remove the hoop from my machine while I'm attaching the hair. You want to line up the tape with that stitched edge there on both sides, and then line up each corner here with the corner of the stitch mark. The hair needs to be in towards the face. And now let's tack those down. Now that we have tacked these down, I'm going to remove this tape. Now, since my hair is sticking out over where the head will be stitched, I'm going to fold it in and tape it down. Again, I'm going to fold this edge in and then I'm going to tape it down. Now when we take this back over to the embroidery machine, we're going to line up the dress fabric seam of the other panel we put together and the dress fabric seam of this panel and stitch them together. Now we are done with the fourth section of the body. Time to move on to the last step. Now we're going to begin with the final hooping. This next portion is easier for me to do if I remove the hoop from the machine. We're going to align the crosshairs here and here with the crosshairs here and there. Take your time and align one side at a time. Hold that side down and then align the other side. Go ahead and smooth it down. Since I'm using sticky stabilizer, I don't have to use tape. Now we're going to reinstall it in the embroidery machine. Make sure that your top layer of dress fabric is folded back as far as you can get it. And we're going to stitch down the next placement stitch. Now we're going to stitch down the placement stitch for the legs. This is how we want our feet. The toes should be facing each other with the Mary Jane shoes. We're going to take them and flip them upside down, just like that, and then put them in on the placement stitches. Okay, now that I have them in position, I'm going to stitch down the tack stitch. Next, we're going to take our feet and we're going to stick them through the hole in the back. Make sure your tabs are tucked in. Make sure your tabs for the legs are tucked in and up out of the way. I'm just going to fold mine over like that and put a little piece of tape to hold them. Then I'm going to pull the back of the dress fabric down, smooth it out the best I can. Now I'm going to finish stitching down the back of the dress. And we are done on the embroidery machine. Now that we have the body of our doll done with the legs installed, we need to remove it from the stabilizer Now we're going to trim around the body about 1/2 inch. Make sure you take small snips out of the fabric around the curves. Do not cut through any of the threads when you're doing this. Now that we have all the stabilizer removed and her trimmed, we're going to turn her right side out. Hemostats. All the way to the top. Open them up. Put the fabric inside of the hemostats, and you can slowly work it through. Now we'll take our stick and make sure that everything's rounded out. All the seams are pushed as far out as they will go. Now that we have our doll turned right side out, we can install her arms. I like laying them down so that I know exactly where they're going to go. I'll take the arm. You're going to pull the doll joint away from the other fabric. Fold the doll joint in half and take a little snip, fold it in half the other direction, and take a tiny snip so that you're basically snipping an X into the fabric. Now take the doll joint, stick it inside and up through that placement stitch. Make sure when you're cutting the fabric that you do not cut any of the stitches. Now we're going to stick this through the hole on her side. See the little hole right here? We're going to stick the doll joint through that hole. It will be tight. And now for the other side. And the washer goes on. This washer has a concave piece and then a flat side. You want the concave side to go towards the doll's skin. Our doll is now complete and ready to be stuffed. When I stuff the doll, I want to start with the hair because it's the hardest part for me to do. I'm just going to open up the 2 tabs and try to stuff as much in there as I can. And then I will grab my wood tool to try to push more in. I'm going to take that portion that I put in. Remember, only do a little at a time. I'm going to try to get it all the way around to the tip or as far as I can. I'm going to do a little more until it's all full. Now for the next side. Again, I'm going to push it all the way to the tip or as far into the tip as I can get it. The next part that I'm going to stuff is going to be the hands because I want to get those thumbs stuffed first. I'm going to take a very little bit at a time, especially for that thumb. I'm going to do the same thing to the other arm. Now that I have both arms stuffed and both pigtails stuffed, I'm going to move on to the legs before I do the body. Now that we have the arms and legs all stuffed, we're going to work on the body. Before you stuff here, you need to make sure you stuff the head first. And our doll is fully stuffed. Now all we need is to sew up all these open spots and then make the skirt. When we're sewing up our doll, I like to get a needle and I double thread it and I knot the end. I take my needle and I stick it inside all the way down about a ½ inch from where the opening begins. I push it in. It's easier for me to hold her like this. And I'm going to go in and out. We're just making a simple ladder stitch. In and out. I forgot to mention a minute ago that I have my edges folded under. I left those tabs, which makes it very easy to sew along this folded edge here. Now I'm going to pull this thread and I'm going to push the fabric in. I'm going to push that stuffing in and I'm going to push the fabric together. And your back is closed. One thing that I do that's different than most people is a lot of the time I will lock my thread and then I will stitch one more line of stitching all the way down. The reason I do this is because I have a 2-year-old who's pretty rough with her dolls. So this allows a little extra structure. When I get about halfway done with the second line of stitching, I pull tight and I make another knot to lock my threads in place. And then I just continue stitching. After we knot our stitch a couple of times, the only thing left to do is to bury our thread. And our doll is all sewn up.